Understanding contrast. Contrast is essential when you're designing for the web, no matter the element in question. An element must be visible and easily understood without hesitation or questioning, otherwise it fails its purpose. For example, this bit of text here features a great contrast because you can clearly read it without any issues. If I were to change its colour to a darker shade like the one on top, this would be a bad example of contrast. And unfortunately, there's quite a bit of this going around, maybe not this extreme, but in the same league nevertheless. Let's take a look at some examples. First, a hero area. The problem here is that the text gets lost in the background. I'm talking about why should I join Blogger Babes? The designer didn't take into consideration the background picture versus the text. When you have a certain layout in mind, you immediately have to set yourself up with some basic principles to follow before you do anything. One of those principles is contrast, the state of being strikingly different from something else in juxtaposition or close association. To fix this area, we'd need to either use some type of layers styles on the text, replace the image with a more appropriate one, or modify the existing one so it works better. None of these options are particularly good. We'll get a bit sidetracked, but follow me on this one. Why should I join is one of the biggest questions the site needs to answer. So that's one of the main things the hero area should focus on. It's a critical element in the entire design. The designer unfortunately failed to prioritize his elements, thus we have this join Blogger Babes today and enjoy our yada 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 that takes up way too much space. This should have been significantly smaller. The same goes for the logo in the top left. By rearranging things, we could have extracted the text out of the video and we would be in a much better position. But to get back to the point of this lecture, this is a clear example of failing to understand contrast. The text shouldn't be over that image. Even if we work a lot on it through layer styles, it would still look quite busy. Putting the woman more to the side and stacking the text on the left would be another option. But it's clear we can't slap on text over anything simply because you can't read it properly. Yes, in this case, you can actually read it, but that doesn't make it all right. This type of layout should be avoided at all costs because visually it's unpleasing. It looks busy. Here's another example I recently received by a beginner student who I'd like to thank, by the way, for letting me use his design in my course. This is actually one of his first designs, if not the actual first one, so we need to keep that in mind. It's an example of poor contrast because of this colour choice, orange on blue and vice versa. I'm sure the designer's thought process went something like this. The logo has two colours, red and pale orange. I'm going to use those throughout the site, and since that's my colour scheme, I'll use it as much as I can. This is why he decided to do this area in this fashion. If you look closely on the left side, you'll see he actually used a drop shadow on the text to get better legibility. That's something I mentioned in my first course and I'm happy he remembered it. What I didn't mention is that you should never combine colours in this manner. Things are dead simple. Keep the contrast at a maximum. If you need to go all the way to the top right of the colour picker in order to get good visibility for your text, then you're doing it wrong. In this setting, the text should have been white in both cases. Moving on to main page 2, we can see that here he used that advice and made the text white. And in that lower element, he used a dark grey in order to get the text to stand out. This brings me to another side of contrast. In general, you should stick to dark grey text layers on white backgrounds. This is your best bet overall. To make it nicer, a very light grey can be used on the main background while keeping our content area pure white. Banners and custom graphics can have a solid colour other than white as the background, but besides that I wouldn't recommend it anywhere. Not even here. Yes, the text can be easily read, but it's still too in your face. Orange, blue, then an inverted colour scheme, it's too much. And continuing on the route of contrast, we have to focus on these two main columns. The right element has much more impact than the main content area, even though that spans 2/3 of the site. That's not okay. The visual difference between them is too striking. If you saw this site from across the room, you'd immediately get a gut feeling telling you something was off. By putting them side by side, you're creating a much too powerful contrast. And even though I said contrast should be set at maximum, that only applies to our text layers versus their backgrounds. You should never aim for clashing or powerful contrast between site elements. I've seen lots of designers make the following mistake. When they work, they set their design at 150% or 200%, so all the way zoomed in. That's not natural. That's not the actual state the design is going to be viewed at. Not to mention the various resolutions and display sizes out there. When you're designing so close in, you naturally see all the details, you see everything better. But it's only a small part of the site. A visitor doesn't see things through the same perspective. They act based on impulse, and if something doesn't feel right, they're out of here. In this case, it's possible the designer zoomed in a lot and created these items almost separately. Because if you're not at 100%, remember that's Control 1, that means you're working through a distorted view. It's fine to zoom in from time to time to check different details, yet you always have to go back at 100%. And as you progress, use Control 0 to see the entire design from top to bottom. This will allow you to judge the overall contrast, balance, and airiness of the design. Finally, let's take a look at some great banner designs. These are taken from galleries that had names like Banner Design Inspiration or Best Banner Design. You can clearly see a trend here. Contrast is essential when you're working in general, but when you have such small sizes, it becomes critical. Notice we don't have blue, green, yellow, or whatever else color used for text. We only have this red, take the test now, which does a good job pointing out the call to action. There's lots to be learned by analysing these banners, but let's keep it short. To sum it up, you have to aim for maximum contrast for your text layers, black on white. Don't try to revolutionise anything with neon greens, yellows or reds, fancy outer glows or whatever else in order to make the text readable. Keep things simple and let your imagery and custom graphics do their job. Don't over-embellish your text layers with crazy colours or loads of layer styles, because by doing so you're making the design feel busy, and there's nothing custom or unique about it. The second part of understanding contrast is to create site elements that are in harmony. Make sure none of them clash or stand out too much like they're from another picture. That's a place where contrast has to be kept at a minimum. Everything must flow effortlessly between your various site areas. So always keep contrast in mind and you'll set yourself a solid foundation.